New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.
Greetings, folks. Welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Brett Roberts, great to have you joining again. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you for having me again.
Always a pleasure for myself.
You're very kind.
I know for New Zealand Tech Podcast audience. So great to catch up.
Don't speak too soon.
Maybe you can remind folks where you fit into this big wide world of tech.
I guess I've been in the tech space in New Zealand since the early 1990s or thereabouts. Spent 13 years or so at Microsoft, and right now I'm doing some very interesting work at Callaghan Innovation.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump in. Lots going on, as always. I'm always sort of looking for that week where we find nothing happening, but
Hasn't happened yet.
Doesn't really seem to happen. I would say that the really big one for New Zealand is AWS and announcing their launch into the New Zealand market with local, a local region, local data centers. But a bunch more things going on, new surfaces coming through from Microsoft, a big sort of shake-up in a way in the world of crypto and Bitcoin and China. Tesla are making some steps a bit further in areas that they've promised us for I guess a very long time. This mythical self-driving vehicle. So we'll try and jump into that, and some very interesting things in terms of, I don't know what you would call them, flying nanobots. These microchips that fly. So some interesting things there, some interesting things from with Vocus New Zealand, one of our key telecommunications providers here in New Zealand, and supporter of New Zealand Tech Podcast. So let's jump in. AWS, Amazon Web Services. I was looking at some of their numbers, and they're it was only seemed to be a few years ago that this was Amazon was always a loss-making company, and people wondered about should we be buying stock in this company that can't turn a profit? Sound very similar actually to probably discussions that were had about Xero for a long time, right? Now both companies doing pretty well. And
you reckon?
I think what's AWS up to? Last time I looked, I think they were must have been heading towards the sort of $2 trillion US dollar mark, which has come along very quickly after becoming moving along very quickly from when the first kind of US tech firm hit 1 trillion, which I think Apple got there first, but Amazon and Microsoft sort of followed, both followed fairly quickly thereafter. But I think pretty exciting to see this announcement for New Zealand. We're waiting on Microsoft to sort of lead the way with their own announcement last year to open data centers first, but so we're not quite sure on exact timing with Microsoft, but 2022 certainly is a possibility. AWS is saying 2024. How significant do you think this is?
Oh, I mean, it's huge, right? Without a doubt. For a whole bunch of reasons. I was looking at the numbers too, and I always find it interesting when you get, numbers being quoted like 1,000 new jobs, and that's a very good thing, and contributing $10.8 billion to the country's GDP over the next 15 years, which off the top of my head works out to $720,000 per job per year. you can couch these things in all sorts of language economically, but it is a very good thing. I think it's a great thing for data sovereignty. I think it's a great thing. It puts New Zealand kind of technically on the map. I think it recognises New Zealand as being a decent sized marketplace now. It provides capability and technology to Kiwi businesses. It's a good thing. Microsoft New Zealand in the market's going to provide some competition. That's a very good thing indeed. I struggle to find anything negative at all. The only thing I would kind of coach or counsel is that I think the number of jobs actually in the data centers is going to be this much, right? I was looking at a thing on Quora a few days back, and Microsoft announced a data center back in 2017 that was going to be 158,000 square meters. So that's a decent sized data center, right? And in total, it was going to create 133 jobs. And I remember talking to a colleague who's now pretty senior at Microsoft these days, who was telling me that one of the data centers that they had in Ireland employed 17 people at any given time, and that included the cleaners and the security people. So, the actual, I think what people need to understand is the jobs that'll be created are kind of second degree jobs, by stimulating the market, making these things more available to people. And that's all really, really good. I think it's a fantastic thing. So, yeah. And some competition between them and Microsoft's a great thing.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. It's great to see them, having to compete hard for the New Zealand customer base. I was encouraged by the $7.5 billion investment into New Zealand. I think or investment as their way of describing it. They use very different. From my recollection anyway, and maybe it's just my memory because it was about a year ago or a bit over a year ago, we heard, Microsoft's announcement, maybe 14, 15 months ago.
Yeah.
All of these firms use communications people to put the message out, right? PR people, we could call them spin doctors, etc. Right?
I've got some good friends that are those people. They're not spin doctors. They're all good people.
Yeah, but they want to communicate in a way that really captures it, and this has been communicated in a different way to how Microsoft did. And I guess that was the bit sort of caught my attention with the $7.5 billion figure, just because I didn't remember Microsoft saying something similar, and I thought, well, what's different? What's different here? Well, probably we see somewhat similar impact, different size, because AWS is certainly the dominant player as far as hyperscale cloud services. They are they clearly hold that number one spot, certainly on a global basis. I don't think we have a clear breakdown of exactly how how that plays out, even globally, and looking at the different stats from the different research firms. One firm says AWS have got 50% of the market, another says they've got 32. Like it's really actually really unclear. One would show AWS with double the market share to Microsoft. Another would show Microsoft, coming up very, very fast on AWS. And certainly being two-thirds or more market share. So it's very interesting. But that $7.5 billion number, I guess, is in many ways really really encouraging, because what it says to me is, well, if they're expecting to invest that into New Zealand over 15 years, well, that's coming out of Kiwis' pockets, right? Effectively, they're not going to invest $7.5 billion unless they're getting back at least $7.5 billion in return. And so, it talks to the scale of how much Kiwi organisations are leveraging the cloud. And of course, when you leverage things well, if we're putting in, let's say it was just an exact match, and Kiwi customers were going to spend $7.5 billion with them over over 15 years. And of course, we're just bouncing numbers around, not this is not
Yeah.
the real figures. Then when you leverage, you expect to get much more back. In terms of hopefully in terms of export return. So without delving in too deep. It's good. I think it's pretty encouraging, and I think Kiwi companies are really innovative in the way that they use these technologies. It's great for us, as you say, data sovereignty. That the data that sits in New Zealand, then it's going to be controlled by New Zealand law, not able to be controlled by another foreign power. What happens, with that data to a large degree? I know there are mechanisms there where US run companies have to do certain things according to US laws.
Really,
it's probably not quite as simple as we would wish. But overall, really encouraging having those systems so close to home. In terms of performance, in terms of concerns about continuity for New Zealand if we got disconnected from the rest of the world. Having AWS and Microsoft, of course, locally, gives us a much more a lot lower risk, shall we say? More robustness there, I think. So, really encouraging. Pretty excited.
I wrote a few notes down just while you were talking there that kind of popped into my head. So, once upon a time, maybe 10 years ago, if this was happening, I'd be quite fascinated by the technical details, and maybe kind of less so now. But there's a couple of things that really intrigue me. So one is, I haven't seen anyone talk about the electricity side of things yet. This is a country where we still have to turn heaters and things off at night occasionally over winter because we don't have a robust electricity infrastructure. And I would imagine both of those facilities, Microsoft's and Amazon's, will consume megawatts of power. So I would imagine if they're being located in Auckland, that's something that they're talking to Vector or one of the electricity companies about.
It is Vector. Yep. In fact, Vector were part of their announcement.
Okay. Yeah.
The media conference, the online media conference last week.
I think
the CEO was talking.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting aspect. And then the other one is, and this has just always been one of my hobby horses for years, is I hope that the tax will get paid in this country as well. It's all very well to take the dollars out, but I think, physical location and staff here and all that sort of thing, I'd be quite interested to see, NBR or Chris Keel at the Herald or someone delve into that side of things. It absolutely creates jobs in New Zealand. That's a good thing. And those individuals pay tax in New Zealand. But what about the corporations themselves who, as we all know, have a wonderful knack and ability to shuffle dollars around the planet to, minimise perfectly legally their tax obligations. So I think some of that's being constrained. There's obviously that world agreement now that's in place with a number of countries, specifically targeting tech companies. So it'd be interesting to see how that part plays in as well. It's a great thing, though. It is, all in all, it's fantastic for the New Zealand tech sector, and it's fantastic for the New Zealand business sector.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point around the electricity side of it. And I had a discussion on RNZ last week, and that was one of the things we delved into because there is that concern: have we got enough power? And well, why is this happening in Auckland and not in Southland, where we've certainly heard some some ideas coming through. With TY Point shutting down, there's going to be extra power available. The closer you are to the power, the easier it is to a degree. Certainly, getting it to the North Island, you got to run it over a bit of bit of wire running under the Cook Strait. A few chunky strings there. And then there's AWS's commitment to by 2025 to have 100% of their data center power being from renewable sources.
Oh, actually, that was the other point I was going to make. I think that's a really good point. I know Amazon and Microsoft are both committed not just to carbon neutrality, I think to carbon negativity, which is a fantastic thing, right? So again, I think all of those things are goodness. It's kind of hard to find anything bad in this. I know there'll be some people that talk about large American corporations coming in and taking dollars out of New Zealand, but that's just how business works. But I think all in all, it's a very, very net positive thing.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious how that plays out. At the moment, it's somewhat debatable whether you can buy 100% renewable energy in New Zealand because it comes off the same grid. You can't say, well, mine came from here and yours came from there necessarily in terms of how things operate at the moment. I mean, you can buy off a company whose own generation capabilities might be 100%, but you get whatever's going on. If you put a load on the grid, then that might lead to more coal being burnt, etc. So that's going to be really interesting to see it play out. I would love to see AWS making some investments in that direction. We're still over 3 years out from the end of 2024, so there's plenty of time for them to figure it all out. They've got to get the OIS approval, the overseas and investment approval from the government. So OIA, I think it is. No, I'm getting my terms mixed up here. What is it, Brett? Overseas
Investment Office, OIO.
OIO, maybe that's it. Yeah, it's all these acronyms. It's I think pretty encouraging, but we'll be certainly following this over the years ahead until we get the results, and then there'll be new things to discuss, and people will be figuring out what's next. And I guess that people will be wondering, especially those that are using Google Cloud services and some of the other vendors, is, well, just how many are coming to New Zealand? Are they all going to set up in Auckland, which is what we're seeing at the moment? The interest in sort of Invercargill direction doesn't seem to be there at this point. And I mean, we could probably delve deep into detail on that one. Let's not do that today, otherwise we won't have time to talk about anything else.
No, you're right.
But I think exciting overall. Would love to hear any listener sort of questions or queries or things that are on your mind. And certainly there's a potential to bring AWS into the conversation at some point. I'm not sure we probably get too much from them at this stage. Now, on to other topics. I haven't seen a local announcement yet, unless I've missed an email or missed some news as of last time I looked anyway. But what I saw out of Australia from Vocus HQ was a note that they're rebranding Vocus NZ, Vocus New Zealand as Orcon Group, and they're going to get rolling on an IPO, on listing what will be Orcon Group on the NZX and on the ASX.
ASX,
yeah, and so dual listing, and that seems to be more and more where things are going, is either entirely to the ASX and not even bothering with our New Zealand Stock Exchange, or a dual listing, I suppose. There's not the confidence there was in the NZX sort of a decade ago, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's changed. I mean, and I must admit, this is not something I follow particularly closely, but I've read a few little snippets along the way of some concerns from a bunch of business people about the NZX. I mean, hopefully, if it's a dual listing, that's a good thing. I'm sure the NZX will be very happy with that. But man, it just goes to show, there is a lot of money sloshing around the world markets at the moment, and there's a lot of opportunities for these companies to go public. And I'm sure it must be very tempting. There must be a lot of banking people scrabbling to get some of these companies to market before that kind of tops out, runs out.
Yeah. So we'll follow that. No doubt there'll be some formal local announcements once they're ready. This looks like it's coming from the financial end with the parent organisation there in Australia. I don't think this will be a bad thing. We've got great leadership on the New Zealand front, and I think. Good things ahead. I'll be watching it with an interest, and there could be changes afoot on other telcos at any point. It's great having a competitive marketplace, and I think we really have that on the telecommunications side. Very strongly in New Zealand right now. Yeah,
definitely.
Now, Microsoft from time to time have been releasing some hardware, and the Surface brand is their big brand in hardware these days, and you could say that they've really drawn from Apple in terms of as a vendor releasing really nice, good. Stylish and well-built hardware where they control the whole thing sort of start to finish by building the software and so on. This is hardware made specifically to run Windows. Generally speaking, actually, there's a bit of a variation there with the Surface Duo and the new Surface Duo. But otherwise Windows. And I remember, hearing from them initially when they launched the Surface product range, and it seemed like this was going to be a real kick in the teeth for the HPs and Lenovos of this world. And I thought, well, yes, you buy HP or Lenovo because you trust they make good equipment and so on. But you basically buy it to run Windows on, and the Apple model had worked quite well, and certainly it's been turned into a good sized business for Microsoft. For years it's typically generated in excess of billion US dollars a quarter. I haven't looked at the figures today, but it's usually pretty strong. So good to see them continuing to iterate, but I'm not sure it all is sort of runs perfectly in that world for Microsoft.
Hardware's hard, man. Real hard.
It is. It really is, isn't it? What are you running in terms of a device these days?
I actually did a count up the other day. I think we've got about 6 or 8 laptops in this house for 4 people. Awesome. I've got 2 Lenovo ThinkPads. The one I'm on at the moment is a Carbon X1, which I just adore. It's great hardware. Haven't used a Surface since one of the first iterations. Might have even been the Surface RT. It might have been the first iteration. But one of the things, just as an aside, that interests me about the Surface business is I know when I was at Microsoft yonks back, there were growing concerns about the quality of the hardware that some of the manufacturers were shipping. And it wasn't so much the physical hardware itself. It was what one of the senior vice presidents referred to as craplets that they used to install on the machines, often as money-making things. They would let all of these vendors, bid for desktop space, and there'd be different search engines and this and that and marketplaces and other stuff in it. Yeah. A lot of them loaded at boot and slowed things down, and they were garbage, and the user experience was terrible, and they weren't reliable. And so I am absolutely 99.9% sure that one of the key strategies behind Microsoft getting into the hardware space was to set some sort of example about how hardware could and should be done. Particularly in a world where Apple are just, they are the hardware company. I don't think anybody has ever built devices as, amazing, robust, feature-rich, regularly updated, all that type of thing. And I think Microsoft saw a gap where there wasn't really anyone doing that in the PC space. A lot of them got kind of dumb, fat, and happy. So I think that as a strategy has proven to be a very good one. I think generally the quality of PC hardware, the capability has gone up since Microsoft got Surface into market.
Yep.
But yeah, I haven't had anywhere near the experience you have, Paul, when it comes to actually using the devices. So
yeah, I mean, we'd certainly see it, within Gorilla across, environments where we run Surface. I've certainly, spent a lot of time using Surface devices. In fact, I think the first Surface Pro when it came out wasn't directly launched in New Zealand, but they launched, I think, on a Saturday in the US, and we had one arrive on a FedEx here on a flight straight back. So it was arrived in New Zealand on Sunday, New Zealand time, and we had it to discuss on the NZ Tech podcast on the Monday by the time it had gone through customs. So a fair history with those devices, and even things like the Surface Duo, which they haven't gone as far as to launch into the New Zealand market or many others. And they do seem to be quite variable. I think your point about hardware being hard is very true. And of course, Microsoft had a really good go at having an important role in the mobile market, and bought Nokia's handset division, and then quite quickly shut that down effectively after Satya Nadella came in as chief executive. So it's been an interesting time. I was looking at a story around Microsoft earnings, and I will just point something out. So this was end of July when they announced their Q4 earnings, and so not too far back, but talking to the AWS versus Microsoft Azure, at that point their Azure had posted 51% growth. I guess probably comparing to the same quarter last year.
Year-on-year growth.
Yeah, so pretty impressive on that front. Interestingly, the Surface revenue fell 20%.
Wow, that's interesting.
So,
given in lockdown, every man and their dog is buying hardware left, right, and centre.
Yeah, quite a surprise. So it'd be very interesting to see some more detailed analysis of exactly what is known about why that's happening. Certainly, what we've seen, and my sample size is not massive, but we do still seem to see ongoing reliability issues with the Surface product that are out of step with HP and Lenovo. I think they make great designs. The Surface Pro, basically created a new category of computing device that didn't exist before. The iPad Pro and a range of other devices from just about every manufacturer has very much mimicked the original Surface product line, but not all of the Surface products are as reliable as we might like. And we've probably, for those that have Surface devices that have had issues, if they're personal devices, or if you get involved in the firmware updates, you might have noticed that they seem to come more regularly from Microsoft, which sometimes that can be a really good thing, that a vendor continues to improve on their product. But when you read pretty much in every one of those updates that it's got reliability fixes, and you're still seeing those things come sort of 2 or 3 years down the track, that's maybe not the best sign. So
actually, and that raises an interesting point, right? I mean, I don't know how many updates my iPad gets a year, but it's a lot, right? but they all happen at night, or just about all of them happen at night in the background, and I don't really think of them. So the user experience is different, even though the situation is probably the same. There's a lot of updating going on, but if you force customers with a laptop to go through convoluted firmware update things that they get to see on the screen that pop up at the most inopportune moments, that's not going to make anyone happy. Hey, just while you were talking, I went and had a quick look. PC shipments for Q1 of this year on year, grew 55.2% worldwide. So the market's grown by half, or the shipments increased by over 50%, and Surface sales declined in that time, is what you're saying, effectively, right? So
yeah.
I would imagine there's a senior VP of hardware at Microsoft that's not having a good time right now.
Yeah. I think there's some indicators there. Actually, and I was just looking online at The Verge. They have some interesting coverage around the new Surfaces, and there's a headline there. You mentioned before using the ThinkPad X1 Carbon. Their headline is Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Carbon Gen 9 review. 9th time's the charm. So I think they're fairly enamored with the ThinkPad there too, especially the X1 Carbon. So pretty interesting. Look, there's certainly a lot we could delve into on the Surface front. The laptop studio seems to be something of a new device. I know some media have sort of said, well, it's maybe not as cool as what people think. But I think it's good to see Microsoft experimenting. They've got they've got the following, they've got the base. It's not quite sort of Apple-like in terms of a following, but people will go ahead and try out most of the sorts of devices that they bring to market. They've got a good customer base there, so so that it's quite an interesting device change. So I'm kind of curious to see how that plays. But that one's the Surface Laptop Studio, which looks like and it's an unusual looking device, I suppose.
It is. I'm looking at it now.
That and the Surface Pro 8 are the first Surface devices from Microsoft to have Thunderbolt. They've got Thunderbolt 4, and those use the USB-C style connection. So there's some pros and cons of that. There have been some security issues with Thunderbolt, and I'd be curious to sort of delve in and see whether they're able to protect against those particular issues we've seen with Thunderbolt in the past, and basically enabling sort of a bypass of encryption on drives that has been kind of a benefit of the Surface products. But a refresh on the design of the Surface Pro 8 that brings it in line in many ways with the Surface Pro X, which was kind of their cutting edge Surface design last year. Which is nice. There's refreshes, a few other refreshes there. And while we're talking refresh, they've gone to faster screen refresh rates. So, of course, we're on the verge of Windows 11 launch as well. So, I'm keen to see the devices and see how they play out. Look, although I've sort of been, somewhat critical of their reliability, it is really nice hardware, when it works, it often works very, very well. But I think they've certainly made some missteps on that reliability front. So we'll see how that plays out. I just loaned my Microsoft Surface Duo to Henry from Business Desk, who was on the podcast a few weeks back. He's keen to get some hands-on, have a little bit of a look at it. We've had an announcement from Microsoft that that they've refreshed that particular product, the Duo, and they've addressed it. It's probably two major shortcomings. One, it's a very high-end phone. I mean, it cost to get it into New Zealand. It was over $3,000 to get hands on because they've not launched it here. So cheaper than that in the US, but an expensive device. But when it came out, it had the last generation chip in it, and in order to fit in its slim case, it had a very, very poor camera in the scheme of things compared to what we expect from a high-end phone from a Samsung or Apple. They've addressed that with a big camera bump. There was really no other way to do it, and they seem to have actually made that work, because I wonder, well, what else can you do? The way it folds back on itself was really, really nice. But they've taken advantage of there being a bit of a gap, and you can put a stylus in there. So a good refresh, but does still seem to be quite a niche product. So I'm kind of curious to follow Microsoft's fortunes, and seeing them drop market share at this point. Not the best indicator for them. So
no.
We'll see how that plays out.
I wrote down something you said. I have to quote it back to you because it would make a terrible tagline. When it works, it often works really, really well. This is why you're not in advertising, Paul.
Oh dear. No, look, I have a like for their devices. I enjoy using them, but having seen so many of them in action, and some of the challenges, it just I think it's slightly out of sync with the rest of the industry in terms of the number of issues. And you'll see that on the forums and the message boards, and the IT folks that are trying to make them work in their organizations, and are tearing their hair out because of blue screens of death and other sorts of issues, which really we shouldn't be having those sorts of issues in this day and age. And I remember back to the old days, the 90s, where those blue screen of death, those crashes, were I don't know, they were you could largely point the blame at Microsoft for software and drivers that weren't quite right. They did an incredible job to address that, but now for it to be Microsoft that's bringing them back, maybe a little bit more than the others, it's not quite right.
Yeah, it's. I mean, what an interesting situation. I mean, I genuinely believe that them getting into the hardware market lifted everyone's expectations around what Windows-based hardware should and could look like. I think that's a really good thing.
I agree. 100%.
The fact that they've backpedaled in sales at a time where everyone else seems to have got right on the front foot is not a good thing. It'll be interesting to see what they do to fix that. I mean, Microsoft is not a company that sits there and twiddles its thumbs when there are problems like that. So I would imagine that there's a lot of soul searching and stuff being sorted out as we speak.
Yeah. Yep. And they've come from behind in many, many fields and done very well. But you're right. The hardware we see today for running Windows on across, every brand is so much sharper, more robust. The industrial design, all of those elements, completely different to what we were seeing, a decade or so back. Absolutely.
I miss my Windows phone though. Big time.
Well, I don't think it's coming back, I'm afraid, Brett.
No.
Now, a couple of other topics I just wanted to cover off quickly because I know we're just about out of time. I see Tesla have opened up the access to their full self-drive beta. This is US only, but there's some interesting tech in there. So if you want to participate in it, because it is still beta, you have to basically give them the okay to consider your driving history. And so they're saying, well, if you're going to hand over to our computer to drive, at this point it is still it is still test software. It's still beta. You need to keep your hands on the wheel, and you need to be awake and not a risky driver. And some people might say, "Oh, that's a bit spooky," but I think absolutely, lives are at stake here. and it's the right approach. So I'm kind of encouraged by that. What we don't know is when are they going to open up this internationally, and when can Kiwis get their hands on it and try it out on New Zealand roads. And I'm imagining that's probably not going to be this year.
No, I think you might be right.
Yeah,
and not just that, try it out on New Zealand pedestrians. New Zealand.
Yeah, well, the tech's pretty good, but it's not 100%, right? The other thing that sort of caught my attention was I saw BBC covering China's central bank, making it very clear cryptocurrency transactions are illegal. And we seem to see things in some ways sort of suggesting that that cryptocurrency is very much going to become normal and mainstream. And there's been a lot of discussion around China launching their own government controlled crypto. But then on the other side, they banned it. And of course, China has been the place where a very, very large portion of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have been mined. They've been sort of the leading country for it. So quite a big turnaround, but the market still looks to be very robust.
I find crypto absolutely fascinating. I can never work out what the hell's going on in there, or when I do, I'm like 10 years too late anyway. But I think the China thing is interesting for a couple of reasons, right? So I've long argued that governments will start to come down on crypto the minute people are able to shuffle vast sums of money across borders without governments being able to see it or tax it. Anti-money laundering is going to get in its way. But also, I think in China, there's something going on in China right now. You look at what happened with Jack Ma, what's happened with some of the CEOs of companies over there, the banning of gaming or the limiting of computer game time. There is clearly something very, very significant and serious going on within China at the moment in the tech sector. And I suspect in some ways this plays into that. Would I expect China to launch their own crypto currency of some sort? Wouldn't surprise me at all. They are, for a totalitarian regime that commits genocide, they are a very sophisticated, smart country technically and economically, and I'm sure I'd be very surprised if they just kind of did a North Korea and shut themselves off from crypto. But would they want some sort of crypto that they could absolutely manage and control themselves? I think that would make complete sense given the way their politics work. So I think there's a lot more to play out here, but I think it's just a small part of a much bigger picture of what's going on in China at the moment in the tech space. And I think that's going to be interesting to see what that is and why. How long did Jack Ma disappear for? 3 months, 4 months? Richest man in China, I think he was at the time. His IPO of, what was the company? They were going to IPO one of his companies, right? It was going to be the biggest IPO in China. Didn't happen, right? So there's definitely something else going on in there.
Yeah. I mean, Alibaba there, and all that he's been involved in has
Ant was what it was.
Yep. And was it Ant Financial?
That's it.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, I wonder whether their most recent actions will create a scenario where China's best and brightest will want to be somewhere other than China to launch their firms, because they just don't know what happens to them if they ever step out of line and don't toe the
party
CCP
line.
Party line, right?
That's right.
Literally is a part of the party line. So
Yep.
So I mean, we'll see how that plays out. The last thing that caught my attention, I think it's a few things that caught my attention over the last week, but that I thought we had to talk about. An article from Vice magazine titled "Winged Microchips Are the Smallest Flying Machines Made by Humans." And they're basically covering off this, concept of, microchip scale, actually, built like a microchip, And we all know what that means. Very, 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 very tiny. Basically winged microchips. That can blow around with the wind, like seeds, and do all manner of things at a very minor scale. So you can imagine, monitoring air pollution was one thing that was mentioned, tracking the spread of disease, and collecting various data along the way. And if they're made in a biodegradable manner, which is what this article suggests, I'm not quite sure how practical that really is, but certainly very, very small. You can imagine these things just kind of just disappearing, really. So pretty interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't seen the article till you sent it through, but I found it quite fascinating. I do a lot of presentations on technology, and one of the things I talk about is just how things are getting smaller and smaller and cheaper and all that sort of thing. And if you go and Google up smart dust, smart motes, the technology to put quite a bit of capability into the most tiny of devices is something that's been worked on for a long time. So when you first flick the link through, I looked and went, oh yeah, sure. But actually, I'm absolutely sure. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be done. And the other thing to bear in mind too here is that when we see these types of things, the military's been doing it for 5 years or 10 years prior, right? If you go in fact, I just Googled up Black Hawk Nanos. So, the Black Hawk Nanos are American military or Western military nano helicopter that's about this big, tiny little things. That eventually I'm sure we'll go down to, Noel Leemings and buy one of to fly around. But at the moment, the military have them that small. But all that stuff always comes out much earlier in the military space. I'm absolutely sure that those things are out there now, being used now. That's the way of tech, right? They're the ones that have got the money to spend on it to make the first one.
Yep. That's where a lot of the funding and a lot of the secret activity comes from. Right. But as the broader populace, we get to benefit from those things that go into military, and there's probably a whole discussion that could be had. And I know it's been raised with Rocket Lab and military type funding and so on, and what that means. Should we or shouldn't we? And similar things around the recent space exploration by from a tourist perspective, and is that good, is that bad, and couldn't that money be spent better on helping people out of poverty and so on. But I tend to think that these things are probably worth doing. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't debate them and shouldn't delve into how to make them work out really well. To be more on the positive side than the negative. But there's a lot of good that can maybe come from things that we're not necessarily that excited by.
Yeah, look, and I mean that's just always been the way, right? The Apollo missions, the Apollo program created all sorts of incredible innovations that eventually made their way into everyday lives. I think that's where Velcro came from, wasn't it? But amongst other things. But I think, you raise an interesting topic, and we could spend a whole podcast talking about this. I'd actually written down the SpaceX thing as a topic to potentially talk about, because I think it does raise some interesting questions, and it just, I think just given, New Zealand's position in the overall scheme of things, the size of us as a nation, I'm sure, right at the beginning, everyone was very enthused about SpaceX and what they were doing, and, incredibly innovative. And look at us, we've got, more rocket scientists per capita than any other country in the world now, which I tell my Australian friends on a regular basis. But, what happens when they start launching American military satellites from New Zealand soil? How do we feel about that? It's probably slightly different. I don't know that it's 100% wrong, whatever, but I think these are difficult, challenging things that we'll need to confront or discuss at some point in the future. That's just the nature of the beast, right?
Yeah, I agree, and it's one of the benefits of living in a democracy, as we can have these discussions. And,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Having
the crypto taken away. That's right.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brett. Great to catch up. Now, if people want to connect with you, you're Brett Roberts on Twitter.
Yep.
Any other suggestions if those want to get in touch?
Find me on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Funnily enough, I have the same name there. Or Twitter. Yep. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I like Twitter. Come and have a chat. I would thoroughly enjoy it.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Brett. And for those that are listening into the podcast, just a heads up, most weeks we are also streaming live more often than not on a Tuesday afternoon. And so you can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and usually Twitter as well. So we'll look forward to catching everybody next week. And thank you again, Brett Roberts, and thanks for listening in, folks. Catch ya. Cheers.
See you later. Thanks.